Good morning. I'm Deep Saini at the University of Canberra. I'm speaking with Michelle Grattan. We are in our weekly conversation about this week in politics. Good morning, Michelle.
Hello, Deep.
Michelle, this has been a rough week for Malcolm Turnbull. The week started with the 30th Newspoll that shows 30 times consecutively that the government is not performing well. You know the history of it. We discussed it last week. Where does that leave Malcolm Turnbull at this point, and how well did you think he handled it?
It was always going to be a really difficult day when that Newspoll came out, and ironically it was very slightly an improvement on the previous one, but of course that was lost because it was that magic number of 30. I don't think he handled it very well because he went out with a number of interviews. There were a whole lot of ministers out defending him, which made it look as though his leadership was actually under more pressure than it is at the moment. But it was one of those days when the desirable tactics were really hard for the government to judge. Now, he's over that hurdle. Of course, the 31st Newspoll is likely to be poor too, but nevertheless, it doesn't quite carry the same import as this one that he'd set up for himself by invoking 30 Newspolls, 30 lost Newspolls when he challenged Tony Abbott.
Now, speaking of Tony Abbott, of course, as expected, he wasn't going to miss any opportunity. He got on his bicycle and
literally and figuratively.
That's right, yeah. And he said everything he could about the poll, and he tried to make hay from this. How well did he succeed?
He certainly threw everything into making trouble, I have to say. He was on his polypedal, annual polypedal for charity, but where was he? He was in the Latrobe Valley, the heart of coal country, and going past the old Hazelwood Power Station, which is now, of course, shut. And he's advocating that the government get into building power stations. How people will react to this, I think many people recognise that Tony Abbott really is about making trouble and are a bit dismissive of him for that reason. On the other hand, he stirs up division, and given that Malcolm Turnbull hasn't been doing well, he just makes it much harder for the Prime Minister to really be seen to be leading a strong team, because he's highlighting all the time the disunity, and it's not just Tony Abbott. There are some other backbenchers, and there are arguments about issues as well as the general performance of the government.
The trouble for the coalition is the coalition itself.
That's right. Speaking
of troubles, another one came from the left field, and that's on immigration, when Peter Dutton is said to have said within the government circles that the immigration quota should be lowered. Of course, there have been denials and claims and counterclaims and so on. Where is the truth on this, in your view?
This is a very strange story. It was a leak to the Australian, and it was denied strongly by Malcolm Turnbull. He said, no, the story has no basis, and yet it was clear later, well, even around the time he was denying it, frankly, that it did have some basis. Now, Malcolm Turnbull was suggesting that there was no discussion in Cabinet, which is apparently right, but the thing is there'd been discussion around ministerial circles. So the Prime Minister looked bad. Tony Abbott, I think, said he looked tricky with this flat denial, which he then had to walk back from. And now there are stories saying, well, the intake in fact is lower, that Peter Dutton has clamped down by other means. So in other words, a victory for Peter Dutton is the way it's being presented. The importance of this whole story is twofold, really: the leaks, the claims, the counterclaims, but also the issue itself, because it's one that does resonate in the community. It's one that Tony Abbott has been pressing, saying there should be a smaller intake, and therefore it plays into all the tensions in the coalition at the moment and the Conservatives' cause and so on.
Another somewhat related area that's causing some difficulty for the government and for our international relations is the constant talk about our relationships with China being strained. There are even rumors that our ministers have been denied visa to visit China. How serious is it, you think?
I think it's quite serious. We have, of course, seen periods of tension before. In the Rudd era, for example, relations were strained, but a number of factors are playing into this, and among those, of course, is the criticism that Australia has made of China's behaviour in the South China Sea, and also in particular the legislation that's now before the Parliament to combat foreign interference in Australian politics. Now, the government says that this is not aimed at one country, it's a general concern, and the targets are broader, but of course everyone knows that in particular there's been worry about Chinese interference, and the Chinese have reacted badly to that, and clearly they're giving the cold shoulder to ministers. So how this works out in the next months and years, I think is very significant. How it's handled by the Australian government, because of course our relationship with China is so important economically, but also it does have these political overtones, and there are differences among China watchers in Australia about how much of a sort of internal threat Chinese influence is in this country. So it's a story with a lot of dimensions and a great deal of importance, I think, for Australian policy.
And of course it's part of the overall geopolitics of China relations, and which is not to be discounted.
Well, that's right, and how we balance our relations with China and with the United States.
Now I'm going to go to something entirely different and speak about your article where you highlight the stress and the appalling conditions that the sheep go through as they are live shipped to the Middle East. When you read the article, it is heart-wrenching to read what these animals go through. Where are we as a country on this one? Because this is not looking good for Australia, and the government has even in fact come out and said they are going to review the situation. Can you please shed some more light on this very disturbing issue?
This issue has arisen this time because of footage from a whistleblower of a shipment of sheep in August of last year, and the death toll was horrendous. 2,400 died, another couple of hundred were unaccounted for, and of course it's just reactivated an issue that comes to the fore periodically, but usually when there is some sort of documentation that people can see on television of bad conditions. The government, as you mentioned, is reviewing the situation, but really this is a trade that Australia should stop. At the very least, and very soon, it should stop shipping these sheep into the northern summer, because the conditions are dreadful. The temperatures are sweltering, and we haven't even seen the worst of the footage from this particular incident that's being discussed now. The coalition is very reluctant to take very firm action, but I think that the Australian people really are not behind this trade, and it's not even a trade that's worth a huge amount of money. It's about 250 million a year. So it would be possible to phase out the trade, to have some sort of adjustment package, and to get rid of something that's a blight, I think, on the reputation of this country. And finally, I'd just say that in the last day or so, the wife of the Israeli Prime Minister has put up a video condemning what she says is the appalling cruelty. So this is being noticed overseas. It's bad for Australia, it's inhumane, it should be stopped.
Well, thank you. That's very thoughtful. Actually, it's a very thoughtful article, and thank you for raising this issue. Well, we'll continue next week, and you have a nice weekend in the meantime.
Thank you,
Look
Deep.
forward to seeing you on next Friday.
Same to you.